cybersecurity, looking at some of the trends and cybersecurity, looking at some of the trends and hopefully also be able to share with you how we envision the space changing in the next presentation. And within this, I'll be basically touching on 3 topics. One is around within this, I'll be basically touching on 3 topics. One is around looking at what we have seen in terms of the evolution of the global through a few statistics in terms of what the Microsoft experience has been, and a few statistics in terms of what the Microsoft experience has been, and in a nutshell, just also share with you how we feel or we advise that the world should be looking at its response in terms of the new security challenges that we're all faced with in as far as dealing with the cyberspace. It changes, and in the next decade with growth we can anticipate this, and in the next decade with growth we can anticipate some common elements. From a cyberspace perspective, it means more people, it means more devices, it means more connectivity and more data. But there is significantly more than most of the cyberspace is really about how technology and digital access, can foster, in our case, economic development. We change the landscape as far as how we deal with healthcare, how we deal with how we communicate as well. All of this will be accelerated. Will be accelerated by how technology is used both in a global and an interconnected world. CAK or CA, or CA. Have to drop the K, yeah, so that it doesn't sound like another entity. Came before me because they touched on a very important topic, which is basically that all need to be amplified or influenced by policy. So public policy or policy choices that we make will also be critical in terms of how technology or how we even shape the cyberspace. So I would just want to probably take us a little bit back into where we have and closing the digital divide. But Windows XP, things have changed since then, but Windows XP was a leading operating system, and Facebook had only 1 million users. You can say only, because obviously things have changed over time. From a threat perspective, since we're talking about cybersecurity, this was a time when we had some complex walls started to appear, like Blaster and Slammer. From a reduction of the phishing started becoming more and more prevalent. From a response perspective, vendors, including Microsoft, it was all about now how do we make sure that we secure the environment. So this was the first time that we're beginning to actually see internet numbers are growing, but obviously even as that happens, then there is also the aspect of threat. How do we deal with that? Internet users grew. USA was not growing as fast, which now begins to show you some trends. That the developed markets, internet usage is not moving as fast as the developed markets. So at the time, the USA had China almost quadrupled from 111 million to 457 million internet users in 2010. And this is the era that we call the always on, which is basically where we started seeing personal devices become a trend, fueled obviously from a threat perspective. As we went into more personal devices, obviously the threat in cyberspace didn't go away. Quite the opposite. And around 2010, we started looking at the fact that it was just about hacking. Remember in those years, you find somebody has woken up and scribbled over a website, and those are the kind of cyber threats that we were actually making money out of doing such interventions. Making money out of doing such interventions. And from Microsoft's perspective, GoodNets had become such a significant threat for us that we decided to go there. Takedowns, the latest was just a few months ago and was quite popularly known as a Citadel bootleg. Let's fast forward to what are we going to be looking at in 2025, and these are some extrapolations, so please don't say Angela said that this would be the figures. So this is extrapolated data. Obviously, a lot of research has gone into it. In 2025, internet users, if you're looking at 2015, we're about 275 in the US. We're approximating that we will have by 2025, say, 475 million users of internet. And this means that in essence, if you were to look at the Middle East and Africa region, which is basically what's most important for us, 1 in every 10 internet, we'll have 1, at least in every 10 people being able to access or use internet. Obviously the explosion will be larger in countries such as China, and will be way ahead the European Union and the USA combined. Will be way ahead the European Union and the USA combined. India will still have room to grow before. Now, the map that I'm sharing there is basically illustrative to show the significant change. So you see USA and the traditional BRIC countries remaining relatively around the same numbers, or not that much internet growth. But interesting is that the growth will be experienced, 91% is in developed countries and 69% in emerging economies. Okay, so the growth will be more experienced amongst the emerging economies. Cloud computing, which is the Internet of Things, and big data, which are large today, will also continue to grow, and we believe, based on that space, the challenges, of course, of cybersecurity. So if you're wondering where I'm getting some of these statistics, we've actually done a study. Microsoft has just released a study known as the Imagining Cyberspace in 2025. It's available on the Microsoft website, so if you're looking for a good read, it talks about, it just gives you an extrapolation. It's a quantitative analysis, a lot of research done in over 100 countries. If you're looking to see where those figures come from, you can go online and you will be able to on www.cyberspace2025.com and be able to see more on that specific study. But just to give you a brief synopsis, of what this study shows. We predict, as Microsoft, that there will be 3 future scenarios that will be affecting the way we look at technology adoption and so forth. And the 2025 model that I have just shared with you has 3 specific scenarios. One is platoon, which we call a baseline scenario. The second is which is a positive one, and the third is what we call a negative scenario, or known as the canyon. The plateau scenario is basically characterized by what we call asymmetry, which means this is where you have highly uneven approaches to governance, technology growth, and the economy. In this form of addressing cybersecurity, it is where government's focus is often on compliance over security, and this results in regular and pervasive cybersecurity failures. More specifically, this happens more in the developed countries. And what we've seen with this is that it in turn leads to reactive regulatory attempts to improve data protection. It means, as Fiona was talking about, these are markets that already have laws. But for one reason or the other, the way we are addressing cybersecurity is more from a compliance perspective, and therefore they tend to react more to threats on cybersecurity. The peak scenario, which is what is characterized by clear, effective government policies and standards, and it shows a strong collaboration between governments to support open trade and promote FDI. And when we look at this particular model, going back to the presentation from the issues of and the earlier presentation from ACJ, I would want to imagine that the scenario that Africa is going for is one that is collaborative. Cybersecurity is not something that we can address conclusively as a country on our own, because you're talking about cross-border transfer of data and so forth. So we may not have our own internal capacities to deal with this specific issue. So we must have partnerships. We must look at what the region as a whole has in terms of policies and frameworks, which is why Microsoft was in support of the African Union Cybersecurity Framework, and also look at what are the methodologies that we can adopt and learn from in order to secure our cybersecurity space. So countries that adopt the PIC scenario recognize the importance of cybersecurity and build national strategies. And we're very glad to see what Kenya has done, and enhance information sharing and law enforcement cooperation. And then the canyon scenario, we don't want to talk about it, but for those who know what a canyon is, these are countries that basically are saying wait and see. Let's see what's going to happen. And basically these are closed economies. Let's talk about them as closed economies, and where technology and economic growth is relatively slow with limited adoption of ICT and therefore deep failures in cybersecurity. So the question that we would like to ask, and if we have policy makers here and decision makers, is we really need to think through what is the best format in which to adopt your cybersecurity framework. Are we looking at being at a plateau or at a canyon? Which scenario do we want to come to fruition? And what are the plans to achieve this? And that's why what Kenya is doing really is exciting. Because you can see some thinking process, there's some collaboration, establishment of entities, there's really some thought-through process in terms of how we are going to address and continue to transform the cybersecurity or the cyberspace as challenges continue to emerge. So, in a summary, why we believe that the peak performance or the peak is critical is because it aligns three different strategies. It aligns one, looking at talent. As we address cybersecurity, we also need to be clear that we have the right modern workforce that can actually be able to sustain innovation. So we need to ensure that we have the right skilled students, and that's why it's great to be here at Strathmore, who are actually taking on studies that will help us to address challenges of the future. The second is about governance, harmonization, which will promote understanding and collaboration among countries. And the third is about cooperation, developing a set of cooperative measures for trust, stability, and reliability in cyberspace. So quickly, as I conclude, just want to go through the Microsoft experience, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with that face. In a memo that was released in 2002, that's how far back this man was actually thinking. It's not amazing then that he was a genius behind the development of Microsoft. Bill Gates sent out a memo that actually set the stage for how Microsoft deals with the issue of security. And in his memo, I'll just take that specific quote, he talks about trustworthy computing. It should be the highest priority for all the work we are doing. We must lead the industry to a whole new level of trustworthiness in as far as computing is concerned. And further to that, Microsoft then built a strategy based on 4 key principles. One being security. How do we ensure that we secure our customers' data against attacks? How do we protect confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data for our customers? Second was around privacy, and Fiona alluded to this earlier. How do you protect from unwanted communication? Give users a choice and control over their data. And make sure that the products that you come up with, since these are all online, adhere to fair information principles. The third element is around reliability. So we built our products based on ensuring that they are predictable, they can be maintained, resilient, and also dependable and always available. And the last was about what business practices we would put in place. And therefore, the commitment that we took is to have a customer-centric interoperability approach and to be as open as possible and transparent. So if you look at where we are today, even with the understanding that there is an increased attack or increased threats, and these are changing the cyberspace environment. Computers, as I said, statistics last year showed that at least the number of botnets or the number of threats had tripled. So this is the kind of extent that we're looking at. But we at Microsoft have been able to ensure that at least we decrease that vulnerability through different forms of through different interventions to ensure that we decrease that vulnerability by 70%. So I'll move on to how do we propose that we respond. We wake up over 75% of the population will be using social networks. 65% of companies also today are deploying at least one social software tool or another. We've also seen the adoption of cloud. Over 80% of apps that are being developed, I'm sure the app team will talk about that, are also developing apps on the cloud. And 70% of organizations are using either one form, whether private or hybrid. But we see government playing a very important role in how we address cybersecurity. And so I will emphasize on the fact, if you're not asking, I need to rush through this, so I'll just go through the last point, which is basically, we see the role of government in exactly what Kenya has done, which is data protector or regulatory environment by establishing the right forms of regulations, ensuring you have the right framework in terms of cybersecurity laws. I'm glad to see that there is a form of legislation that has been proposed under the Cyber Crimes Act. What we'd like to propose is that for us to deal with the threats of the future, it's important that we have the right acts. So aspects such as data protection or the Privacy Act, changes to the Communications Act, which have actually been pending since Honorable Rege was in Parliament at the time serving as the chair. Till now, every time we see the Cabinet Secretary, he says it's going to happen next month. But I think for us to be able to, and I'm not criticizing him badly, he's actually somebody that I have a lot of respect for. But basically what we're saying is that some of the policies that we have put in place, including the launch of the cyber security strategy that was unveiled by CA, will only be effective if we can have the right policies in place. So we do need to fast track with having the right effective public policies in place. We need to have these bills, the Data Protection Act, we need to have the Privacy Act put in place in Kenya, so that we are also able to deal with the cyber threats of the future. With that, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to allow the presenters. Thank you.